Welcome. This is topic one. We are looking at Plains Indians culture, ways of life, and I think it's really worth mentioning this date sheet. So, my group, you have this in your folders. You need to know that this course is set out in 3 time periods, and there's a couple of events that mark the start of the next time period. It's a little bit like Elizabeth, where certain things fall either side of an event. So we begin with the early settlement. This is our early farmers, our early migrants going across in 1835, and it goes to 1862. Now, the reason it ends in 1862, there's a couple of things happening. If you look in this middle section here, this amber section, we've got the Homestead Act, the Pacific Railroad Act, but Little Crow's War is your marker. So this is where things start to change, where we've got conflict with those Plains Indians. This goes on to 1876, and 1876 is the chosen date because this is the Battle of Little Bighorn. So this is known as your conquest era. This is the part of history where the Indians are really starting to lose a lot of their ancestral lands, and the white Americans really are taking over. So please make sure you understand the differences between those 3 time periods. Okay, going to start with Indian society first of all, and you need to know how it works because it helps explain conflict a bit later on. So in terms of organisation, Indians split themselves into nations, tribes, and bands. I think it probably is worth saying here as well that in the exam they will refer to them as the indigenous people of the plains, but you calling them Indians or Plains Indians is absolutely fine here. So nations, tribes and bands. Nations if they're really large, like the Sioux, and within the Sioux you can have sub-nations like the Lakota Sioux, the Dakota Sioux and the Nakota Sioux, and they all have their different customs and cultures. Decisions are made by chiefs, councils, elders and warrior brotherhoods. There's no one leader, one person that makes choices. And often chiefs are picked by their talent, so their bravery, their skills and their wisdom, and it doesn't mean that you get that job for life. They understand that maybe as some people get older, they might need to replace them with somebody else. Bands could be hundreds or they just could be 20 people, so it really did depend. There was no fixed number there. In the summer, they would meet at a great tribal camp. They would come back together if they'd split at all. This is social reasons, but also for survival. You might be swapping some women there or getting involved with some business, maybe swapping some horses for some weapons, etc. Women are really important for the tribe, and I have put a star here because this one could come up. They are really important at this time for looking after the entire tribe. So men are the hunter-gatherers and women are the ones that process the buffalo. They make sure the family can eat throughout the winter by smoking the meat, for example, and they use all parts of the buffalo for clothing, and the hides are used for the teepees. In terms of survival, there are lots of different methods that Indians use. So we start with horses here, and they are used for several reasons. They could be currency, so it represents your wealth here. And we know that the Comanche tribe had 8,000 horses, but only 3,000 people. So they were using those horses for trade there, for survival. They are also for travel, as we know that Indians are nomadic. They do not stay in one place. They move place to place. They use the horses to help them do this. And also for warfare. They decorate their horses, they decorate themselves, and they charge into other camps. So horses are really important for those things. We also have the buffalo being extremely important. They are the main food source. Sometimes these are called bison. It is the same thing. Okay, buffalo and bison are the same creature, but they provide the main source of food, the main source of meat for the tribe. So they are revered. They are treated with great reverence. They use every single part, and they normally bury the heart as kind of an offering to the earth. Nothing is wasted, and they deeply respect the buffalo. Make sure that you could name some of the things that they use the buffalo for. For example, they use the hides, the skin, for the teepee, for the shoes, and they use things like bones for making weapons. They also are skilled archers. This is their choice of weapon before they encounter guns, and they use archery to attack their enemies and to attack the buffalo. Now, as mentioned before, they do live a nomadic lifestyle, so they follow the migration of the buffalo, and this is for their survival. So this is why they cannot stay in a single reservation, because the bison or the buffalo do not understand how to stay in a reservation. They have to follow them. How do they achieve their nomadic lifestyle? If you have to up and leave quite a lot, they transport their items, their belongings, their teepees on a travois, which is dragged along behind a horse normally. And their teepees can be folded down in order that they can be moved from place to place. Now, not every tribe was completely nomadic. Some of them did stay put during the winter. They wintered in camps because we know the weather on the plains is quite extreme. Okay, then next we're looking at their religious and cultural beliefs. And again, be thinking about comparing this to the white Christians. The religions are very different here, and there is little understanding by the whites about how the Indians operate. So, in terms of land, they believe that land is sacred, so the literal Mother Earth. It cannot be tamed, it cannot be owned. They think that mining is disrespectful, so they don't agree with the gold mining that is happening. And then later on, some of them do get involved with it. So farming and mining, not on the agenda for the Indians. They have a deep respect and reverence for the animals and the land. They are very spiritual, and they also believe that you can enter the spirit world through vision quests with your spirit animal. So they believe that everybody has a spirit animal and you kind of follow it, you're guided by it, and you can enter the spirit world and you can ask questions maybe about an upcoming raid or something else in the future. So you can contact the spirit world. They also believe that before war you can perform rituals where you can charge up magic items with chanting, and this is for luck or protection. Now that sounds very nice until you are met with a rifle at the hands of the Americans, and then it doesn't quite work. In terms of war, they fought very differently to the white Americans. Um, there are several different warrior brotherhoods. So these are young, fit, strong men in a tribe, and they are really, really valuable because a tribe needs young men for the next generation. They have several really important roles, including passing on the tribal customs down to their children and so forth. They're picked for their bravery and skill, and they don't have to answer to the chief or the tribal council necessarily. If they don't agree with a decision a chief makes, they can go off and make their own decision, and that would be okay. They could break treaties, for example, that their chief has agreed to. They carry out raids. This is for survival, for their weapons, for food, for horses. And if you are especially a good hunter, you will be picked to become part of the guard unit, where you go on the yearly buffalo hunt and you make sure that your whole tribe have enough food for the entire year. The way that they engage in battle is completely different. So they believe in something called the counting coup, where if you can creep very closely to your enemy and hit them with a big stick and run away unscathed, that you are brave. Now, this is different to battle with white Americans who want to aim to injure or to kill the enemy. They also perform, or some of them perform, something called scalping, where you would get your enemy and you take their skin and their hair from their head and you keep it as kind of a trophy, maybe on a magic stick, and it shows your bravery that you have taken somebody's scalp. Now, this was a big sign of disrespect because it meant that that person could not get into the spirit world. So it really was a sign of your bravery. Obviously, when the whites encountered this, they found the Indians to be barbaric. They thought this was a savage act. Okay, On to the next subtopic in here, which is government policy towards the Plains Indians, and this one is really important for this year. So it does begin with the 1830 Indian Removal Act, and this is where President Jackson moved 46,000 Indians to the west of the Mississippi River. The idea was that this would be Indian territory, they would never have to be moved again, and they would be left alone. So this was now Indian territory. The idea was that the whites and the Indians do not mix, they do not cross. Later, in 1834, the Indian Trade and Intercourse Act was passed, and intercourse in this regard means communication, okay? So it's almost like communicating with the Indians. So the idea here is they were going to move slightly further west again, because the whites wanted land in Missouri and Louisiana. There was very good farming land there. So they shift them on just a small amount, okay, another couple of states. The whites wanted that good farmland. And this now creates what they coin the permanent Indian frontier. So this is what they now call this Indian land, the Indian frontier. A frontier is like a boundary. So it's like an imaginary drawn line here that means that whites will not cross this frontier. And meanwhile, it also bans the sale of guns to Indians, and it allows army forts to start to be built along this frontier so that the two do not cross. So these first two, you must understand, early government policy was that Indians are kept separate from white people. They did not want them mixing. This all changes with the 1848 USA-Mexico War. Mexico loses this war, and it means that America make a bit of a land grab for some of the areas in America that they don't yet own. So this includes Texas, where all of those Texas Longhorn cattle are, and California, where gold is just about to be discovered. They also, at the same time, managed to get some land in Oregon that Britain had previously owned. So, with all this new land, really, really far west, they now want to encourage people to cross the frontier, that Indian land that they aren't really meant to go into. They want people to cross that land in order that they can start to populate California and Texas. Now, the reason they want people to go there, they need people to populate California because they don't want the Mexicans coming back and trying to take it again. So the government changed from keeping separate to let them go across. Then, in 1851, we have a slight change again with the Indians Appropriations Act. And this is where the American government put aside a few $1 million in order to encourage an early type of reservation. So they used that money to move some of the Indian tribes into reservation-style areas of land. They were allowed to still leave them to go buffalo hunting, so it isn't quite a reservation yet, a formal one, but they encouraged them to move off of where the trails are. And they want them to stop farming as well, so they kind of encourage that too. They are negotiating with the Indians at that point, so government policy now is negotiating because they believe that the Indians do still have a claim to the land, a rightful claim. Our next bit of government policy then, it's the same year as the Indian Appropriations Act, and it's the Fort Laramie Treaty. Now, it's in 1851. Gold has been discovered in 1858. We have a gold rush in 1849, and suddenly the government is under pressure to keep everybody safe. People that are crossing the plains want to be safe, and the Indians want people not to trample across their land and scare their buffalo. So, this is the agreement. They invite lots of chiefs to attend this meeting at Fort Laramie, and they are going to draw on a map boundary lines. They're going to say this area is Indian land, this area is American land. They are going to ask the Indians to allow any migrants, any US migrants, to pass through safely. And by safely, that means that they want the Indians to stop tribal infighting. So that nobody gets hurt in the crossfire, and they want the Indians to allow the government to start to build roads so they can pass through safely, and they're going to start to put some army forts in this land. If they agree to all of this, they will get an annual payment called an annuity of about $50,000 worth of stuff. Okay, so that's food, that's resources. Some of the Indians like this idea, they sign it, and some of them do not. Only a select few Indian chiefs were invited to sign this document, Not all tribes sent representation, and it was written in English, so lots of them turned up and they had no idea what they were signing. Some of them just turned up because they were there for the free gifts. The government were giving out crates of resources if they turned up for this negotiation. So some of them signed and they didn't understand it. Now, what you might have also noticed as well is that some chiefs sign this document. You know that the rest of the tribe doesn't have to follow it if they don't want to. So really, it's meaningless to the tribe. What are the consequences of the first Fort Laramie Treaty? And remember, there are two. There is a second one. So this one is the start of very, very early reservations by drawing boundary lines. And this damages the nomadic lifestyle of some of the Indians. The other one is it undermines previous treaties. So the Indian Removal Act and the Indian Trade and Intercourse Act was meant to put up a frontier and stop white people trampling on this Indian land. So it disrespects that. Another one is reliance. It creates a dependency on the US government for handouts. So this causes tensions and bad relations between the government and the Indians. Finally, it is the start of railroad building. This is another consequence because one of the agreements was that they would allow the US to start building some of this infrastructure, these roads, and they'd allow surveyors there to start looking at where they might place a railway. So what they start doing is fencing off certain bits of land, which scares the buffalo or stops the migration of a buffalo in a certain way, which again disturbs the nomadic lifestyle of the Indians. Sorry, I'm still new to this. I've just pressed back on this slide. So I think, I'm really sorry, I don't think I'm duplicating this. I think I'm starting this again. What I was saying is I think this is a nice visual here. So we've got the Indian Removal Act here, shows you, it follows the line of the Mississippi River, and it shows you that on this side, this is where the Indian land was now, and this is where the white should be, and it was known as Indian Territory. Here, this is the kind of imaginary frontier line. This was no whites should cross this line because this was now Indian land. The whites wanted Missouri, the whites wanted Louisiana. The Indian Appropriations Act, this reservations are in pockets of Oklahoma here. Now later on, the whites in the Oklahoma land rush, they're going to want this land here because it's good farming land, but this is meant to be those early style reservations. And then finally here, these are all the different states that were won from Mexico in the US Mexico War, but California here, far west, is the one that we're really interested in. Okay, we are now in our development section then, so just be aware this is from 1862, and your big hint here is that 1862 is when the Pacific Railroad begins to be built. So it's a bit of a hint as to what development means. The West is now kind of being modernised, I suppose. They're bringing the railway to the west. So how would that impact Indians? Let's have a look. The railroad will impact them in several different ways. So firstly, the government gives land away to railroad builders who then shoo off the buffalo off of the land that they're building the railway on. It stops the nomadic lifestyle. It takes away grazing land for the buffalo, which impacts the survival of the Indians. We also have homesteaders, and the railway brings in homesteaders, which causes problems because they bring cattle with them and other livestock that eat the grass. Who else wants to eat the grass? The buffalo. So now we've got them competing for grazing land. This causes a decline in buffalo, and it also does disturb the migration of the buffalo. Again, this will impact the nomadic lifestyle as homesteaders won't allow Indians to cross their land, and there is competition now for that grazing land. So it threatens their food source. We also have hunters being brought in to the plains to hunt buffalo, which sees numbers decline. That means there's less food. If there is less food, they're weaker, they might not survive a winter. It also increases conflict because we've got surveyors on the land who are sometimes attacked as they are as they are planning a rail route, and sometimes the army is brought in to protect railroad builders or surveyors, which leads to tension. And also these army forts are a permanent reminder on the landscape that that land is being taken from them. In terms of cattle, then, that's another impact. And again, it's the ranchers and the homesteaders. They're claiming land that Indians have previously used for hunting or for living in, which disturbs their nomadic lifestyle, which impacts their survival. It's the same idea with grazing as well. There's 4.5 million cattle on the plains by 1880, okay, so it's just kind of near the end of our period, and they all need to eat grass. Again, this impacts on the buffalo. Cowboys as well. So the incentive here is that some Indians actually leave their tribe and they become cowboys, which means they abandon their traditional lifestyle behind. It's a loss of culture. And cattle trails also disturb the Indians because Goodnight Loving Trail, for example, or the Chisholm Trail, they can sometimes cross Indian land. This might lead to attacks, but also sometimes the Indians might charge some of these cattlemen to cross their road. Diseases spread at the same time, which can impact the buffalo. This will impact survival. Final impacts on Plains Indians' way of life, then, we are looking at gold prospecting to start with. So we know that with the onset of the gold rush, this caused lots of people to rush to California, and in doing so, they were removing the Indians from the land. Lots of other bad stuff going on meanwhile. So, firstly, we have murder. Quite often, the government would turn a blind eye and allow the Indians to be murdered in order to get to gold because the government are going to make money from people gold prospecting. This caused a breakdown in relations as the Indians were not being protected. We also have new diseases being brought in. We have lots of people coming from quite far away. We've got Chinese immigrants. We've got lots of European immigrants. People bringing new diseases that the Indians had never encountered before. This means they don't have an immunity and it decimates some of these tribes. This therefore impacts survival. In terms of new culture, in the mining towns, there were buildings like schools and churches that the Indians had never encountered before. This way of life was alien to them. In turn, this leads to a loss of culture and a loss of tradition as they are viewing a white American's way of living. Further, we have the impact of war. This is where Indians have been offered money to move away from land where there is gold, like the Black Hills of Dakota, and when they reject this, there is a breakdown in relations, which then leads to clashes, such as in Red Cloud's War. Finally, looking at reservations, and this did arise last year, reservations have a huge impact on the Plains Indians' way of life. So, on the first point here, they are forced. Often Indians do not wish to move to this land. They are escorted there by the army, or if they have lost a war, that might be one of the consequences. Sometimes they agree to them because their people are starving and there really is no other choice. They lose their hunting grounds, they lose access to their sacred grounds. This is their loss of culture, loss of tradition, reliance on the government for food, and the loss of their nomadic lifestyles. Also, we have the issue of assimilation. We know that the government wanted the Indians to simply become farmers. It was going to be a less murderous, a less stressful way for them to become part of the United States. Quite often they are put onto land that is not very good to grow crops. They lack the skill, this impacts their survival, and they have to beg for handouts. This leads to a fracture in relations between the US government and the Indians. We also have broken treaties as well. Treaties are disrespected and disregarded. Quite often as well, treaties that are agreed. We know that the way the Indian culture is organised, warrior brotherhoods, for example, don't need to follow the orders of a chief, so they can simply ignore the treaty. This leads to more tensions rising and breakdowns in relations. We also have the disrespecting of traditions. Once again, when we are placing Indians into reservations, the US government are disregarding that in Indian culture, they do have enemies, and you might be putting two tribes who are at war with each other together, and they don't magically get on because of the predicament they've been placed in. They still are at war, and this is not respected. And again, with the movement to reservations, we've got the loss of culture and tradition. Finally, we've got poor land. Obviously, the land that is given over is not the best land because the white Americans keep that for themselves. So the farming is not successful for the Indians. They don't know how to do it. They have been given poor land, and therefore they need to go and ask the government for help once again. This leads to resentment and a further breakdown in relations.